May 27th, 1943, Pacific Ocean, near Marshall Islands. Something went terribly wrong high above the Pacific Ocean. A bomber carrying young American airmen suddenly lost its safe rhythm. Inside, Louis Zamperini felt a warning he could not ignore. No one knew this flight would end in the middle of nowhere. Days earlier, Louis and his crew were already deep in their mission across the vast Pacific, flying long hours over endless water with rising tension in every flight. But this true survival story didn't start here. May 21st, 1943, Funafuti Airfield. Ellis Island's Louis was part of a B-24 crew preparing for a dangerous search mission over enemy-controlled waters. The briefing was simple: fly far, find targets, and return before fuel or weather became a problem. The engines roared as the heavy bomber lifted into the sky without warning of what was coming. Louis looked out at the ocean below, calm and endless, hiding no signs of danger. Hours passed as the crew searched far beyond their planned route. Then mechanical trouble began to whisper through the aircraft, changing everything instantly. The bomber suddenly shook as alarms filled the cockpit and control became harder to maintain. Inside, fear spread, but training kept the crew focused as they fought to stabilize the plane. Minutes later, the impossible happened. The aircraft could no longer stay in the air. The ocean swallowed the sound of the crash, leaving only scattered wreckage and survivors fighting to stay alive. Louis and the remaining crew managed to pull themselves onto a small life raft drifting in open water. No land was visible, only endless waves under a burning sun that offered no mercy. At that moment, survival began, and hope became their only fragile anchor. But what happens next will change everything. They had no idea what came next after. They were alive, but trapped in the middle of nothing. No land, no rescue, no direction, just endless ocean in every direction. The life raft drifted slowly over deep blue water, pushed by currents no one could control. Louis Zamperini sat soaked, breathing hard, trying to understand what just happened. One moment they were flying. Now they were floating like debris. The sun burned down without mercy. There was no shade, only heat, salt, and silence. May 28th, 1943, Pacific Ocean. Far from any landmass, the survivors were now fully exposed to the Pacific. Their bodies were already weak from the crash impact. Their clothes were torn, soaked, and heavy. Every movement on the raft felt painful and slow. The raft carried only basic survival supplies, barely enough to keep hope alive for a short time. A small emergency kit, a few water rations, and limited food. Nothing meant for long survival in open ocean. At first, they tried to stay calm. They checked each other, counted supplies, planned rescue signals. They believed search planes would come quickly, but the ocean gave no answers. Hours passed, then a full day. The silence started to change their thinking. Every wave looked the same. Every horizon stayed empty. Then something worse began. A dark shadow moved under the water. At first, it was just a shape. Then it came back again, closer. Sharks, the men froze, watching the water around the raft. No one spoke. The ocean was no longer just empty. It was alive with danger underneath. Louis stayed focused, forcing himself not to panic. He had to think clearly. Panic would waste energy. Energy meant survival. The sun moved slowly across the sky, turning the water into a mirror of heat. Their mouths dried quickly. Salt burned their skin. Even breathing felt heavy. By night, the ocean changed again. Darkness surrounded them completely. No lights, no land. Only the sound of water hitting wood. They huddled together on the raft, trying to stay awake, trying not to think about what was beneath them. Hope still existed, but it was already thinning, and far beyond the horizon, rescue ships had no idea where they were drifting, or if they were still alive. And this is where the ocean began to test them, in ways they could never imagine. The ocean did not change, but the men did. Every hour on the raft felt heavier than the last. The sun rose again, just like before, but now it felt like punishment instead of light. Their skin burned, their lips cracked, Their eyes stayed locked on the horizon, searching for something that never came. No ships, no planes, only water. May 30th, 1943, Pacific Ocean. Drifting west of initial crash zone, the survivors were now fully cut off from any known rescue path. The raft drifted without control, carried by invisible currents deeper into open ocean. Food was already becoming a serious problem. The emergency supplies were small, carefully rationed from the start, but hunger does not follow rules. It grows quietly, then suddenly becomes everything. Louis Zamperini tried to keep order. He checked supplies again and again. He tried to keep the others focused. But fear was starting to sit in their eyes. One of the crew began to weaken faster than the rest. At first, it was small signs, slower movement, less talking, longer silence between breaths. Then came the shaking hands, the body refusing to obey simple commands. Dehydration was taking control. Their water supply was already dangerously low. Each sip was measured like gold. But it was never enough. The man who was weakening began to drift in and out of awareness. He stared at the sky for long periods without speaking. The heat did not stop. The ocean did not stop. Nothing stopped. Louis noticed it first, but said nothing at first. There was no medicine, no rescue, only time. By the third day, the situation became worse. The man could no longer sit upright properly. His body had stopped responding the way it should. The raft became quieter, not because of peace, but because hope was disappearing in small pieces. That night, the ocean was unusually calm, too calm. The silence felt heavier than the waves. And before morning arrived, one of them did not wake up. No ceremony, no words, only the realization that survival had already started to take its first life. The remaining men stared at the body in silence, unable to fully process what had happened. The raft suddenly felt smaller, heavier, more fragile. Louis looked away toward the endless water, forcing himself to breathe steadily. Fear was no longer just emotion. It was becoming reality. And as the sun rose again over the empty Pacific, they all understood one thing clearly. Survival was no longer about rescue anymore. It was about how long the human body could keep going before it gave up next. The ocean turned hostile in ways they could no longer ignore. After the first loss, silence on the raft felt different. No one spoke unless necessary. Every sound, the creak of wood, the splash of water, felt sharper. The ocean around them was no longer just empty space. It felt alive, watching June 2nd, 1943, Central Pacific Ocean. Drifting farther into open sea, the raft had now been at sea for days with no sign of rescue. The sun kept rising, but their strength did not. Hunger and thirst were now constant. Not a feeling that came and went, but something that stayed in every breath. Then the sharks came closer. At first, it was just movement beneath the surface. Dark shapes circling slowly under the raft. Then closer. Too close, one shark bumped the raft hard from below. The impact shook the fragile rubber structure. The men froze instantly. No one needed to speak. They understood what it meant. The ocean was no longer just carrying them. It was testing them. Louis grabbed what he could, ready to strike if needed. Every movement had to be controlled. Waste no energy, waste no chance. The sharks circled, again and again, sometimes disappearing, then returning without warning. Sleep became impossible. Closing eyes meant risk. Then the weather changed. A storm rolled in without warning, swallowing the horizon. The calm water turned violent. Waves rose higher, slamming into the raft. Wind tore across the surface, dragging salt spray into their faces. They held on tightly as the raft lifted and dropped like it would break apart at any moment. Water flooded the raft. Supplies nearly washed away. Every man fought just to stay inside it. For hours, there was no rest, only survival. When the storm finally passed, everything felt different. The ocean was calm again, but they were not. Their bodies were weaker. Their food was lower. Their fear was deeper. Hunger now became constant pain. They began to ration even more strictly, splitting what little remained into smaller and smaller portions. The body begins to argue with logic at this stage. Every instinct screams for more. Louis stayed alert, scanning the sky, hoping for rescue planes. But the sky stayed empty. Days blended together. Time lost meaning. The sun became their only clock, rising and falling without relief. And somewhere in the distance, unseen by them, their rescue search was already fading away. They were no longer just survivors of a crash. They were becoming survivors of the ocean itself. And the worst part, the ocean was just getting started. The ocean no longer felt like water. It felt like time, slow, endless, and crushing. Each man on the raft was changing now. Not just weaker, but different. Their bodies were starting to fail in small, visible ways. Movements became slower. Thoughts took longer to form. Even sitting upright felt like work. June 8th, 1943, Central Pacific Ocean, drifting deep into open sea by now, they had lost track of how many days had passed. The sun still rose every morning, but it no longer meant anything. There was no schedule, no rescue signal, no certainty. Dehydration was now the main enemy. Their mouths stayed dry no matter what they did. Lips cracked open. Tongues felt thick and heavy. Every swallow was painful because there was almost nothing left to swallow. The salt from the ocean mixed with sweat and burned their skin constantly. Even the wind carried salt into their wounds. Louis Zamperini could feel his strength dropping every day. He forced himself to stay alert, to keep looking at the horizon. If he stopped watching, fear would take over completely. At night, things became worse. The darkness on the ocean was absolute. No lights, no land, just the sound of water and the raft shifting under their weight. Sleep came in short, broken pieces, and even in sleep, their bodies never fully relaxed. Some of them began to drift mentally. They stared at nothing for long periods. Conversations stopped making sense. Simple tasks became confusing. The line between reality and exhaustion was starting to blur. Louis noticed it but could do nothing to fix it. Food was almost gone. Water was nearly finished. Every ration felt like it might be the last. Hunger now worked differently. It was not just pain, it was distraction. It pulled focus away from everything else. It made thinking harder. One of the men tried to stay strong, but his body was clearly collapsing. He moved less each day, speaking fewer words until even that stopped. Louis stayed close, trying to keep him present, but survival was no longer something they controlled. It was something happening to them. Then came the strange moments, brief flashes where they thought they saw something in the distance, a shape, a light, a sign of rescue. But every time, it vanished. Whether it was imagination or hope breaking down, no one could tell anymore. The ocean never changed, but the men did. And as their bodies weakened, one truth became clearer than ever. Survival was no longer about strength. It was about how long a broken body could refuse to stop. The ocean stretched on without mercy, but something inside them had changed. They were no longer reacting like shocked survivors. Now they were adapting, slowly, painfully, to a world with no land and no certainty. June 15th, 1943, Central Pacific Ocean, deep drift zone days had turned into a blur. No one could say exactly how long they had been floating anymore. The raft was not moving toward rescue. It was being carried away by currents no one could see. But survival now depended on small adjustments. Louis Zamperini and the remaining men began conserving every movement. Even turning too fast wasted energy. Talking too much was avoided. Everything had to serve one purpose: staying alive. The raft itself became their entire universe. They learned its weak points, where to sit to balance weight, how to shift slowly so it wouldn't tip, how to protect the remaining supplies from waves and sudden splashes. Food was almost gone, but they tried to stretch what little remained. Every bite was divided carefully, shared without argument. Hunger still hurt, but now it was predictable. A constant background pain. Water was even more critical. When rain appeared briefly on the horizon, everything changed. They watched the sky like hunters. When drops finally fell, they used anything they had to collect it: hands, fabric, even small containers from the survival kit. Rainwater became more valuable than anything else in the world. For a short moment, it felt like the ocean was giving something back. But it never lasted. The sharks were still there too, sometimes visible, sometimes only shadows beneath the surface. They no longer panicked at every movement, but they never forgot the danger. At night, exhaustion created strange moments. Louis sometimes thought he saw land far away. Other times, voices seemed to come from the water, but he forced himself to focus on real things. The raft, the men, the sky, reality and illusion were starting to mix, but he refused to let go of control completely. The bodies on the raft were weaker now, but something else was holding them together. Not strength, not supplies. Routine survival had become repetition. Wake, watch, ration, wait, and still, no rescue. Only the endless ocean and the slow drift toward a fate they could not yet see coming. But what they didn't know was that the Pacific still had one more shock waiting for them. Hope did not arrive as rescue planes. It arrived as something far more unexpected. After weeks of drifting, the survivors were weaker than ever. Their bodies were thin, dehydrated, and barely functioning. Every sound on the ocean made them lift their heads, searching, hoping, fearing. July 30th, 1943, Central Pacific Ocean, unknown drift, location the raft, floated under a pale sky. The men were quiet, almost motionless, conserving what little energy they had left. Even thinking felt heavy now. Louis Zamperini scanned the horizon like he had done every day. Nothing. Just water and sky merging into one endless line. Then a sound broke the silence. It was distant at first, barely noticeable. A mechanical roar carried across the water. All three men reacted instantly. Aircraft. For a moment, something inside them lit up. Rescue. Finally, they struggled to sit up, waving weak arms, trying to signal. Their movements were slow, but desperate. Every second mattered. The plane came closer. But something felt wrong. It was not flying in search patterns like rescue aircraft. It moved with purpose. Low and direct, Louis squinted, trying to understand. His mind, exhausted from weeks at sea, struggled to process what he was seeing. Then the markings became visible, not American. The realization hit hard. The hope that had just risen collapsed instantly. Before they could react further, the aircraft circled once overhead, confirming their position. The men on the raft froze, unable to fully process the shift from hope to danger. Minutes later, a second sound arrived, this time from the water. A patrol boat approached. This was not rescue, it was capture. The men were taken from the raft, their weakened bodies lifted carefully, but without comfort. There was no celebration, no relief. Only silence and tension. Louis looked back at the raft as it drifted away. Everything they had endured, still floating behind them in the open ocean. The endless survival at sea had ended. But something far darker was beginning. As they were taken into custody, the reality settled in slowly. They had survived the ocean, only to enter another kind of struggle entirely. And this new fight would test them in ways the sea never could. The raft was gone behind them now. Only the ocean remained in Louis Zamperini's memory, endless, silent, and unforgiving. But the journey that began with fire and crashing metal had finally reached its final moment on open water. July 31st, 1943, Central Pacific Ocean. Aboard Japanese naval vessel, the men sat in silence after being pulled from the raft. Their bodies were weak, barely able to hold themselves upright. Every muscle hurt. Every breath felt slow. There was no celebration of survival here, no relief. Only control. Louis looked at the water as the ship moved forward. The same ocean that nearly killed them now stretched behind them like a closed chapter. 47 days of drifting hunger, thirst, storms, sharks, and exhaustion. Now ending without applause. The reality settled in quietly. They had survived something almost impossible. Not because they were strong every moment, but because they refused to stop. Even when their bodies were breaking down, the raft journey was over. But survival had changed shape. It was no longer about floating in open water. It was about what came next. Captivity, uncertainty, a new kind of endurance. Louis Zamperini sat back, exhausted, his thoughts unclear but steady in one way: he was still alive. Somewhere far behind him, the Pacific Ocean continued as if nothing had happened. Waves kept moving, sharks kept circling, sun kept rising. But for him, everything had changed forever. The ocean had tested him. And he had not disappeared into it. Instead, he had become part of one of the most extreme survival journeys in World War II history. One that began in the sky, ended on the sea, and would continue far beyond the horizon. And this is where the raft survival ends, but the story of endurance truly begins.